back. We have a lot of topics to talk about. Here you see on the left some of the inquiry comments that we've been receiving, and it's pretty much overwhelming to some extent. It would be an entire course to teach on some of these, but I'm going to go through some of these that are very, very important and really justify a pretty thorough discussion on what the potential is of ValAsta and astaxanthin. Dan asked about dosing, and dosing always comes up as an issue as to how we did it. We've been looking at this since about 2012, trying to determine it, and it's what delayed a lot of the presentation of this outstanding product into the marketplace. So there's several different approaches that we use to determine the dosing because there wasn't a lot of work done on this. And with that, when we look at dosing from animal studies, typically it's 1/6 or 1/7 of the animal dose rate. So we initially started at a base load of 1/7 of the animal dose values. This is a NIH paper here that you can look at. Because there was limited human studies on this in the very beginning, but the results that we were getting showed that this had a pretty substantial effect on inflammatory diseases. Since 2013, we've had several severe, these are stage 4 cancer cases, that we were dosing at levels of 100 to 3,000 milligrams per day. No side effects were observed. There was no downside. We are now in 27 countries, all 50 states. We have over 3,300 clients, all with hundreds of testimonies. So the testimonial background is subjective analysis as to our dose level without causing any harm and with no side effects. This is a calculation that we use. We look to cover every single cell in the human body with about 5,000 molecules. 5,000 molecules gives us enough free electrons to donate to handle a CRP in the neighborhood in excess of 40, which is a pretty high CRP. That's 40 milligrams per liter. If we find that your CRP is greater than 40, then typically what happens is we're going to just increase the dose. So we want to match it to the concentration of the hydroxyl free radical that's present in the human body. So when we calculate this, we get 3.7 times 10 to the 13 cells per about 100 kilograms of body weight. That gives us 3.7 times 10 to the 11th cells per kilogram. 5,000 molecules per cell gives us about 18.5 times 10 to the 14th molecules per kilogram of body weight. Now I got to convert that into milligrams per kilogram of body weight. So the molecular weight of astaxanthin is 597 grams per mole. The number of molecules per mole is 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. That's called Avogadro's number. So when we run through that calculation, we end up with a dose rate of 1.83 milligrams per kilogram of body weight to maintain about 5,000 molecules on the cell surface. Dan then asks, has anything been published that you know of? If not, do you know why not? Let me do this one first because it's in line with what he asks there. Says he's not seen any clinical studies. There's a lot of in vitro studies, but no controlled human studies on treatment outcomes. The NIH has only recently begun human studies. The search engines that we use to find this generally are, for example, Capecitabine. You see there has been used with astaxanthin to stop pancreatic cancer. That one's pretty dramatic. So some of the Capecitabine chemo drugs in combination with the ValAsta are showing tremendous cure rates. So there is a combination here that hasn't even been looked at yet on the net effect of using these in conjunction and getting a sort of a 1 + 1 = 3 synergistic combination that is having tremendous results. The other one that I want to refer to here is if you search NIH and cancer and esophageal cancer, you'll see some NIH reports there. These are typically animal studies, but the work is definitely pointing from the biochemical point of view into there shouldn't be any difference between human and animal work when it comes to these types of cancers. The chemistry is the same. It is fundamental biochemistry. This is not the general medical complication type of studies. So from a biochemical point of view, it should work in the same pathway. The other issue that I have is why wouldn't somebody, esophageal cancer is one that doesn't have real good positive outcomes. Why would you not try this? You'll know within 60 days. And understanding what the fear is and making sure that your fear of not doing this is justified. At this point, there is no negative side effects. Either it's going to work or it's not going to work. So there's no downside to this. And you'll know very, very quickly. You'll see your CA numbers. Your current weight loss from the cancer will stop. You'll begin gaining weight. Some of the CA numbers might even spike a little bit. When the cancer cell dies, it will release these cancer antigens into the bloodstream, and you might see a pretty dramatic increase. It usually freaks out oncologists simply because it's an indication that the cancer is growing prolifically. And the reality is when they see those, they're gaining weight. Their pain has gone away. So typically it's inflammatory. The MRIs, CAT scans, and PET scans cannot differentiate between what is an inflammatory response to the dead and dying cancer cells and what is viable cancer. So everyone should be aware of that and question that. If there's no other symptoms, if you're not losing weight, your pain level isn't increasing, or you're not seeing other symptoms of cancer, then it's probably inflammatory. And it's going to take a while for the body. It took a while for you to get cancer. It's going to take a while for the body to get rid of that cancer. So if there's nothing threatening, the simple fact that you have cancer, everyone is generating cancer cells. So the simple fact that you have cancer in your body does not mean you're going to die. It may not even be viable cancer. So understand the holistic view of your body as far as how do I feel? What's the quality of my life? Am I actually improving? Is my weight loss stopped? Is my energy level coming back? Because as we all know, cancer does not behave that way. Cancer will deplete you. If you're the opposite of that, then it's probably not viable cancer. I hope that helped with that explanation. Now, why aren't there more studies? You'll have to ask the NIH and Big Pharma. NIH is actually allocating funds now based on a lot of the data and research that we have sent and published. And one of the most important parts is to keep your CRP less than 3. That is a measure of your inflammatory disease state. And it reduces the odds of you getting an inflammatory disease if you keep that number under 3. Annette and Virgil ask about cancer stem cells. This oftentimes applies in the bone marrow, but it can also apply in soft tissue cancers also. Does ValAsta kill cancer stem cells so cancer can't come back? This is one that we can generate cancer whenever we're in an inflammatory disease state. So if there's a hydroxyl free radical floating around, which we all have them floating around in our body, we can cause a chemokine called interleukin-6. Interleukin-6 is a quarterback. It tells the body chemically that it's got to react to an inflammatory condition, and we see it with COVID also. Interleukin-6 gets activated, interleukin-10 gets shut off. And I'm going to explain both of those. Interleukin-6 is the inflammatory cytokine. It's usually activated, and it's in most cells, including stem cells, and it's activated by typically a free radical in its cycle, in its pathway. So the fewer number of those free radicals you have, the less the inflammatory response will be. Some people are genetically predisposed, that's how they present with cancers or with inflammatory diseases. Others might be type 2 diabetes. Some might be arthritis, irritable bowel, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. Well, what ValAsta does, ValAsta stops the hydroxyl free radical, or reduces its concentration to the point where the body can handle it, and it reactivates the interleukin-10, which is the suppressant cytokine for interleukin-6. It's the brakes. Interleukin-6 is the gas feed for an inflammatory response. If interleukin-6 is pressed and activated, you have all the inflammatory responses: hot flashes, fevers, disease, DNA mutations. There's a whole slew of cascade events that'll happen. Interleukin-10 are the brakes. For example, in COVID, interleukin-6 is turned on, interleukin-10 is turned off. If you turn off the brakes, now you've got an inflammatory response where COVID, the inflammatory response will actually probably cause your death. Interleukin-10, if it's suppressed, will not stop that from happening. So these are all things that we want to look at. It turns out that they're both activated negatively and positively, inhibited or upregulated by the hydroxyl free radical. The interleukin-6 is upregulated, interleukin-10 is downregulated. Well, that needs to be reversed, and that's what ValAsta does. Desiree asked about Capecitabine and cancer numbers. Capecitabine is a form of chemo treatment. The bines, B-I-N-E, are a specific family of chemo drugs. The cytabine type of chemo drugs appear to work synergistically with the ValAsta. The doctors that are using them in combination see a very rapid kill and recovery from the cancer. These are typically fairly aggressive cancers. They can range from aggressive colon, lung cancers to pancreatic cancers. The problem with these very aggressive cancers is that they will, and she has seen it here also, they start out with localized inflammation, which will not show up in the systemic CRP number. But when it becomes systemic, when your immune system is highly activated, and the ValAsta will do this, it will try to reduce that CRP. Now, if the cancer is dying, several things can happen. The cancer itself, once it dies and the cells rupture, can release all of the guts of that cell, all of the cytosol, all of the mitochondria, all of the processes that are inside that cell will get released into your bloodstream. That in itself will cause an inflammatory response. So you can get this type of an effect, which is, I've been taking ValAsta for 8 months now. My CA15 numbers have steadily risen. I started taking the recommended dosage, then for 4 months have increased the ValAsta to 7 capsules, each with 4 pumps. This last test I took was concerning as the markers have skyrocketed. My CRP, which has been around 1 for several months, is now 9. So what that means is that she has moved from a local, probably a cancer defense mechanism. It didn't want to heighten the immune system of the body. So her systemic CRP was 1. Now that she's attacking the cancer and the cancer cells are beginning to come apart, that's going to spark an inflammatory response in her bloodstream. This is a little high. I've seen it go as high as 20. It's the trend that I'm more interested in that CRP. It will spike exactly what she has seen here. It might even go to 20, but it'll spike and then it should start dropping very, very quickly. Especially at this dose level. The soreness in the affected breast. I would like to know, I don't know enough about this case, but if there's a tumor in her breast, several things, the oncologist probably would not tell you this, but I am. If you have a tumor in your breast and that tumor is dying, there's only 2 mechanisms at which that tumor can come out of your body. It can either be dissolved and reassimilated back in and recycled back into your bloodstream. The amino acids can be recovered and reused. Or, probably in this case, the cancer has died and now the macrophages, the white blood cells, are going to push that tumor right out of your body. It's going to erupt, depending on the size. I've seen it erupt through a hole 5 inches across, a hole 1 inch across, and the tumor actually leaves and expelled right out of your breast. Those are difficult times. It scares a lot of people. I just want you all to realize that it does happen, and it is something that you want to put in perspective when it does happen. I've had a couple cases where there was a tumor on the inside of the right breast. She could feel it deep. She put her on ValAsta. It began to come up. It turned red. It looked like it was growing, but the reality is it was that large in her breast, but it was coming to the surface. Her body pushed it out. The skin broke open, just like a boil. The hole enlarged, and she put a saline cloth over the top of it, and one morning she woke up and it was actually expelled from her body, laying in the towel. These are things that oncologists typically do not see, and it can be a little nerve-wracking when it happens, but her CA numbers went to normal, and so it's all part of the process. It's not it's not something that people want to see or even talk about, but it is a reality, and I just want people to be aware that that can happen. Now, in this case here, the soreness in the affected breast, it may even turn red, it might turn purple, the skin may rupture, the tumor itself will appear to get larger as it comes out. But keep watching your CA numbers. Your CA numbers are initially going to climb, and then once it gets to the surface, turns red, it might even have a fever, just like a boil. You should see your CA numbers increase and then start to drop back down again. Stay with me here, Desiree, as you go through this. It's oftentimes very difficult to understand when it begins to happen. They could go in and do a biopsy of it and see how much necrotic tissue is there. When the skin does open up, you can see it turn black. At that point, you can put the oil, the ValAsta oil, directly onto the tumor, or the salve directly onto the tumor, and you can flake it off. You can actually debride it, and it'll come off, treat it just like a burn, and be able to scrape it off. So that's a lot of information, and I don't really want to scare anybody, but it is something that can happen, and we've seen it in a number of cases. Brian asked about glucose and diet. Says, I'm concerned that I have cancer. I'm still waiting on test results, so I'm doing as much research as I can. I've read a lot about fasting and zero carb diets as an effective way to deal with cancer by starving the cancer of glucose. Would this counteract the ValAsta because glucose is a Trojan horse? Any advice on the best diet to pair with ValAsta for cancer? I want people to understand you cannot starve cancer. That is a total myth. Cancer has priority over all the sugar that your liver produces. So if you cut sugar out of your diet totally, about 80% of the glucose that your body uses for energy is produced by the liver in what's called glycogen. It converts glycogen reserves into glucose. So if you stop eating sugar, the liver is still going to produce glucose. Since cancer has 100 to 1,000 times more glucose channels on its cell surface than normal cells, statistically, the cancer cell has priority. So any sugar floating around in your bloodstream is going to be used by the cancer cell and not your normal cells. So when the glucose is depleted by the cancer cells, your normal cells starve. And that's why you lose weight when you have cancer. The only cells that you'll kill by cutting sugar out of your diet is going to be your normal cells. You cannot starve cancer. Cancer has priority over that. Now, with that said, glucose is used by every single cell in your body for energy. Fructose is not used by a single cell in your body. So, if you want to cut out a sugar, cut out all fructose, all fruits, all high fructose corn syrup, and all foods containing high fructose corn syrup. No sodas, no breads, no potato chips, no table sugar. Table sugar is 50% fructose and 50% glucose. Glucose is the only sugar that, not the only, but the majority of your energy comes from glucose. Fructose cannot be used at all. Fructose goes to the pancreas where it is converted into triglycerides. The triglycerides, once they reach a level of about 400 milligrams per liter in your bloodstream, are converted by your liver into LDL cholesterol, the bad abrasive cholesterol that causes endothelial and epithelial cellular inflammation. It's like sandpaper going through your arteries, and it will cause atherosclerosis, heart disease, pulmonary issues, kidney failure. Fructose is the cause of over 60% of all inflammatory disease. So, with that in mind, eat those things like vegetables. You can even have a baked potato. Baked potato starch has no fructose in it, and all of that energy can be used by every cell in your body, including the cancer. But if you're going to eat protein, stay away from red meats. You don't need the iron. The iron is accumulated by cancer cells, and it's needed to generate more hydroxyl free radicals. That creates the acid environment around which cancer survives and normal cells do not. So we're looking at chicken, fish, as far as a protein source, a lot of vegetables, preferably uncooked vegetables. Wash them, clean them. You lose about 50% of the antioxidant effect of a vegetable when you cook it. So if you're dealing with a disease, you're always better to eat raw vegetables versus cooked vegetables. Green peppers, for example, are great. Potatoes, celery, carrots. Eat as many of those. It's the Mediterranean diet that you really want to go after.